Tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
Today we see it as a victory and hopefully the start of more to come.
Criminal charges are laid in the 2009 death of a BC worker. Also,
I need my money. I need to pay for school.
no pay. Former employees of a now-defunct pub say they're owed thousands. And
this was actually a genocide against our people.
Canadian genocide, the findings of a national inquiry into the murders and disappearances of Indigenous women.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
Good evening. Criminal negligence charges have been filed against a well-known Canadian construction company and former managers after a young man was killed on a BC worksite more than 10 years ago. CBC Vancouver News at 11 host Dan Burrett joins us now live with more on this. So Dan, what's the significance of criminal charges?
Mike, some are calling these unprecedented for a major multinational corporation. Now, in 2009, 24-year-old Sam Fitzpatrick was crushed by a falling boulder on a Kiewit hydroelectric construction project on the BC Central Coast. His younger brother watched him die. He shouted warnings to him, but Sam was wearing hearing protection and couldn't hear him. Now, Peter Kiewit's sons, two former managers, Timothy Rule and Gerald Cargella, are each charged with one count of criminal negligence causing death. One expert on corporate criminal liability says these charges are very significant.
At the very least, this is symbolically significant in the sense that they are indicating that they feel that there are factors involved in Sam Fitzpatrick's death that warrant some kind of criminal accountabilities.
A WorkSafe BC investigation noted a, quote, reckless disregard for safety on this project, and Sam Fitzpatrick had spoken up about that weeks before he was killed. Kiewit was originally fined $250,000 for Fitzpatrick's death, but it appealed and the penalty was cut to less than $100,000, Mike.
Okay, Dan, it's been nearly a decade. So what happened in the 10 years that led up to these charges?
Well, after the fine against Kiewit was cut, Sam Fitzpatrick's father, Brian, approached the RCMP and spent the last 8 years of his life pushing for some sort of accountability. He reached out to the United Steelworkers for help, and they did help him, making this video.
So they went to work, and they weren't happy about working there. They knew it was dangerous. And Sam's last words to Arlen were, let's just get this over with. And not long after that, Sam was dead. Surviving.
Sadly, Brian Fitzpatrick died in 2017, shortly after he learned the RCMP had recommended charges. Family, friends, and the steelworkers say today is bittersweet.
I hope the message resonates across the country that that taking people's lives, you just don't do that and get away with it. You don't do it in any other part of our society. It seems to me that in a workplace it's been okay. It's not.
For its part, a Kiewit spokesperson says the company disagrees with the charge and will vigorously defend itself in court. For more on the story, please head to our website, cbc.ca/BC. Our colleague Bethany Lindsay has done some incredible work on this and has much more there. Mike?
Dan Burrett live tonight. Thanks. It is a tale of bounce checks and unpaid wages that has some former pub employees fed up. They are young, and for at least one of them, it was a first job. As Belle Puri reports tonight, when the pub shut down back in January, they say they were left without jobs and without pay and tip money for weeks of work.
So, how's it going, guys?
Friends meet for a visit, and one topic dominates their discussion.
Have you been paid by Bruce Street yet?
Never.
The trio claims their former boss owes them thousands of dollars in back pay.
I think I was at Bruce Street for about 10, 11 months. I had about 5 bounce paychecks. This is one of the bounce checks.
Nursing student Sydney Iverson alleges she's owed $4,600 for wages, tips, and use of her personal credit card.
I need to pay for school. I have like phone bills, gas, all this stuff. Like, I need to get my money.
The friends worked at Bruce Street Craft and Kitchen in Port Moody. The lights and taps are still on, even though the place closed in January. 19-year-old Jaden Rudlin worked in the kitchen there and alleges he's owed $700.
I said, guess what? My check bounced 5th in a row. Can I please get some cash? And then he didn't answer that. We put so much hours in, and then he just treats us like this, it's a smack to the face. Like,
Rudlin has filed a claim with the Provincial Employment Standards Branch in a bid to get his pay. Iverson feels she's missed the time limit to do that and may have to fight for money in Small Claims BC. Between December and April, the branch received complaints from roughly half a dozen people who used to work here. They claim they're owed money, that they weren't paid their wages in the weeks leading up to the pub's closure. Corporate records for Brew Street list David James as company president. CBC tried multiple times to speak with him. Initially, James left a phone message. If you can give me a call back, I don't mind talking at all.
Hi, I'm looking for David.
Subsequent efforts to connect with him in person all failed.
I'll just hand you my card. If you have him, call me, please. Thank you very much.
He did write CBC an email. Brew Street has made arrangements with the Employment Standards Branch and individuals to pay the remaining outstanding fully on June 4th. Tori Stone hopes that's true. The 22-year-old was a server at Brew Street and estimates she's owed up to $2,000.
People shouldn't have to fight for their money. It's their right. Like, if you work, like, you have the right to be paid.
The friends feel their experience is a heads up for other young workers.
look out for this, because it happens a lot, not just with us, and you just got to learn when to put your foot down.
Their hopes now rest on whether they see any money next week. Belle Fury, CBC News, Vancouver.
The BC Court of Appeal has overturned the acquittal of driver Ken Chung in the death of a Vancouver doctor. Chung's lawyer confirms his client has now been convicted of dangerous driving causing death. In 2015, Chung was driving his Audi nearly 3 times the speed limit when he crashed into a red Suzuki. The force reportedly sent the Suzuki into the air. Its driver, Dr. Alphonsus Hui, died at the scene. Chung's lawyer says sentencing will take place in provincial court at a later date. One of the first people to see Abbotsford Police Constable John Davidson moments after he was shot dead testified in court today. Jaren Skett was emotional as she told the court she ran to the parking lot of the Abbotsford Strip Mall after she heard gunshots. She recalled how she saw Davidson bleeding on the ground and tried using his radio for help. 53-year-old Davidson was on the scene responding to reports of a stolen car. Oscar Arfman has pleaded not guilty to first-degree murder in the officer's death. That trial is scheduled for 8 weeks. Darcy Clark, the mother of 3 children murdered by their father, has died. Clark was married to Alan Schoenborn, who killed their 3 children in a Merritt trailer back in 2008. Family spokesperson Dave Teixeira confirmed her death Thursday. Schoenborn was convicted but deemed not criminally responsible for the deaths in 2010. He is held at the Forensic Psychiatric Hospital in Coquitlam and has been allowed escorted visits. Well, halfway through its mandate, a new opinion poll suggests voters are satisfied with the BC NDP. Data published by Research Co. shows 39% of those polled would vote for the NDP tomorrow, compared to 30% for the BC Liberals, 21% for the Greens, and 9% for the BC Conservatives. And voters seem to be similarly content with the Premier, 51% approving of John Horgan's performance. Well, the poll offers no insight as to why support may be so high, but halfway through its term, the NDP has followed through on 3/4 of its election campaign promises. The CBC's provincial affairs reporter Tanya Fletcher is following up on some key promises that still have question marks beside them.
Well, I think it's been an extraordinary 2 years.
The NDP campaigned on 122 promises when it formed a minority government in 2017. Halfway through the term, 90 of them have been completed. Of the 32 still outstanding, progress is being made on 18, while 14 have not been fulfilled. One of the main ones, the controversial renters rebate. We asked Deputy Premier Carol James whether that's still on the table.
We're continuing our work with the Greens around the renters rebate, but we've already been able to make a difference for people who are renting or looking to buy a house as well.
She points to measures designed to moderate the housing market and hails progress on childcare. But what about the promise of $10 a day daycare?
In fact, you're seeing prototypes all around the province. We wanted to make sure that we tested it out in urban settings, in rural settings, Indigenous settings. So there are a number of parents who are in fact paying $10 a day. We'll then do an evaluation.
On the education file, she highlights their elimination of interest on student loans. Yet the commitment for $30 million in school supplies still has not been fulfilled.
So we started with playgrounds, and we know school supplies is one of those pieces we're continuing to look at.
But the opposition claims the government has not moved far enough on affordability.
They're now at a point where their housing promise of 114,000 units will only take another 70 years to complete at their current rate. In Surrey, they said they would get rid of half of the portables, 273 portables in 2017. They said they'd be gone by the summer of 2019.
Looking ahead, here's what Liberal leader Andrew Wilkinson suggests they'll be watching especially closely.
We're going to hear from Premier Horgan's somewhat contrived review of gasoline prices on August 30th. He said you're not allowed to talk about pipelines, you're not allowed to talk about taxes, and you're not allowed to talk about the carbon fuel standard, so we're not sure what they're going to talk about.
Not surprisingly, a much more positive outlook from the Greens. Party leader Andrew Weaver considers their alliance a success.
One of the things I think that many people have realized is minority governments can work.
And this week marks exactly 2 years since the Greens signed a confidence and supply agreement with the NDP.
So there were some teething pains, but when you focus again on your commonalities and on people and your shared values, you can get a lot done, and we're very pleased with that.
Tanya Fletcher, CBC News, Victoria.
BC's minimum wage is going up this weekend, but maybe not as much as some would like. Saturday's increase will see wages rise more than $1 from $12.65 an hour to $13.85 an hour. Critics, however, suggest more money's needed. The Living Wage for Families campaign and the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives argue the living wage for Metro Vancouver in 2019 is $19.50 an hour. They plan to present the government with a report on that matter later this year. A stunning and devastating word summed up Canada's Murder, Missing Indigenous Women and Girls National Inquiry: genocide. A leaked copy of the final report was shared with CBC News ahead of its official release on Monday. The CBC's Olivia Stefanovich breaks down some of the details inside.
Every Canadian must know the truth, because it's truth that liberates, it's truth that emancipates.
That truth, according to the National Inquiry's final report, is that violence against Indigenous women and girls amounts to what the commissioners call a Canadian genocide. Words deliberately chosen to reflect centuries of colonial racism and oppression. Something Ivana Yellowback says she's known all her life.
It's like a kind of colonial genocide. It's ongoing. And this is something that has been happening for hundreds of years.
Yellowback has 3 family members who have either disappeared or have been killed.
You know, it's crazy that it took $92 million and this commission report for those same statements and those words to be verifiable. When our families and our mothers and our cookums were saying these and telling us, even as young women growing up, to be careful.
The commissioners cite research dating back to when the term genocide was first coined in the wake of the Holocaust. But the report isn't explicit about why the definition applies here, and some question whether the use of that word is accurate, because international law says there has to be intent.
They are framing the issue by dropping cultural genocide. They're arguing that the intent of the Government of Canada and other authorities in Canada has always been the biological elimination of the Native peoples in Canada in all of its acts. And legally, if we went to court, we would have a very difficult time proving that.
The authors seem to recognize more explanation is needed, saying they plan on writing another report. It will outline their reasoning for defining what happened to Canada's Indigenous peoples as genocide. Olivia Stefanovich, CBC News, Ottawa.
Even though details are still being digested, reaction to the report has been strong. BC activist Lorelei Williams says she's grateful the report drew attention to what it called a Canadian genocide.
Canadians need to understand that. The world needs to understand that. They need to understand that Canada isn't perfect and there was a genocide against our people and against our Indigenous women and girls. And that's why we have missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. Predators know that they can target us because of that.
Well, finding parking on Granville Island can be a headache, to say the least. But as the CBC's Tina Lovegreen reports tonight, starting tomorrow, all-day parking will be paid, which island operators hope will mean less congestion.
It's picture perfect, a great place to bask in the sun and maybe even enjoy your favorite ice cream flavor. It's all fun and games on Granville Island until you try to find parking.
Look at that guy got ahead of you.
I think he's trying to get the parking. And drivers have a saying around here.
It depends on today you are lucky or not.
Some are more strategic.
Make sure you get here early.
A secret this Taiwanese family wasn't in on since it was their first time visiting. It took them an hour to find a spot.
It was really awful.
And when they eventually did, it was stolen.
We were backing off like that, and then, boom, she's there. So we're like, wow, it's our first time in Canada. We thought Canadians are nice. No.
Perhaps not when it comes to parking, but the folks who run the island want to put a stop to the waiting and circling around.
We know that congestion is a problem on the island. Sometimes it backs up Anderson Street. We know that there's a narrative in the city about how hard it is to drive to Granville Island. So we really want to change that narrative.
Starting tomorrow, whether you park on the street or in the parking lot, it'll all be the same price. And you'll have to pay from 11 a.m. to 6 p.m. And outside those peak hours, parking is free. There are 1,200 stalls on the island, and since half of them are free, people tend to stay longer than permitted.
We're really hoping that by improving availability, we can get more people down here, more turnover, and that it will help support our businesses.
They've been complaining about parking since the beginning of time. It used to be a deterrent to come to Granville Island.
Despite that, his family business has been around for 40 years, and David Moorhead hopes the new rules don't change that, though he does worry.
Is this a good change or bad change? We'll have to see.
Tina Lovegreen, CBC News, Vancouver.
Well, some great news tonight for the endangered population of southern resident killer whales. A newborn orca calf has been spotted off Tofino swimming with J-Pod. These photos of the calf were posted on the Tofino Whale Center website. The DFO hasn't confirmed the birth, but says if true, it was fantastic news. Only 75 southern resident killer whales remain, and the population is reported to be at a 30-year low. Two major wildfires are still burning out of control in northern Alberta. One is about 35 kilometers from the town of Slave Lake, and while the wind is blowing the smoke and flames away from the community, the mayor is optimistic but cautious.
I think the anxiety level is a lot less today, but you know the forecast can change quickly, and there's not a lot of moisture, coming up. So we continue to remain very concerned.
Slave Lake remains under an 8-hour evacuation alert. More than 10,000 people have been forced out of their homes across Alberta. Meantime, the wildfires are affecting air quality across the province. While it's been slightly clearer in Edmonton today, Calgary and Red Deer are still dealing with a thick, acrid haze. People with breathing difficulties are being told to stay inside. Closer to home, BC Wildfire Service confirms crews have been deployed near Dease Lake as a precautionary measure. Northwest BC is at high to extreme fire danger rating due to kindling dry conditions. Fire activity has persisted in the area since last summer, with hot spots smoldering in around areas like Alkali Lake. Warmer conditions mean crews need to watch for flare-ups.
So we do have crews working on putting those out right now, and they'll be setting up a 150-person fire camp in Dease Lake, and that includes an incident management team, so they can help create a long-term response plan to the fires in that area, as well as helping with any others that pop up.
BC Wildfire Service is also monitoring Kamloops and southeastern BC, saying the warm conditions could result in lightning strikes. And Christy is here now with the forecast. And Christy, is the weather having any impact in those areas we talked about?
Well, Mike, it does look like the hot and dry, persistent weather across BC is really aggravating fire conditions in the province. Here's a look at our current fire risk for today. You can see many areas, especially as you get towards northern BC, are in that orange and red, seeing high to extreme fire risk. What that means is fires can get going very quickly and can spread very rapidly as well because conditions have been so dry, well below normal, really in most areas of the province for the month of May in terms of precipitation. Northern Saskatchewan seeing quite a bit of that extreme fire risk. Now, as we move through the forecast, it looks like not a lot of change, especially as you move towards the Vancouver area, onto the island as well. Lots of sunshine as you head through the weekend, even into next week a little bit. And if you're in the Vancouver area, temperatures remaining above seasonal. Here's a look at the next 24 hours. 14 degrees at midnight. Temperature is cooling off maybe a degree or so by the morning, but warming right back up. 22 degrees at 4 o'clock tomorrow. Temperatures inland even warmer than that. Now, how long will it last? I'll let you know coming up.
Thanks, Christy. Talk to you in a bit. Well, all week we've been giving you an inside look at what it's like to be a student in a modern-day high school. And to cap off our series, Matheson, CBC Radio's The Early Edition was live on location.
You're listening to a very special Early Edition live from Matheson Secondary School in Surrey. Going to meet some of the students and teachers that make up this very vibrant and very diverse school. There'll even be some Bhangra dancing.
Plenty of students and staff on hand this morning for the finale. Over the time our reporter Jason D'Souza spent at Matheson, he built some real connections there. Some students even slept at the school overnight to welcome Stephen Quinn and the rest of the crew.
People judge a lot of schools, and especially Matheson, so being a part of it and showing what it's really like inside of it was a really good thing.
And I think I just saw how good my school was, because I know LA Matheson isn't portrayed that way, so that was good to see.
Each part of Matheson is available for you to watch on demand. Just visit us on YouTube by subscribing to CBC Vancouver. And Jason's written all about what it was like to live the life of a high school student for a second time. You can read his reporter's notebook on our website, cbc.ca/BC. And while you're online, make sure you also like our Facebook page by following us on Facebook, YouTube, and our website. You won't miss any of the content we post exclusively on each platform. You can also watch this newscast streaming live and on demand there and on our free app, CBC Gem. Well, Raptors fever has moved west to Vancouver, but not everyone's jumping on board the bandwagon. We'll talk the sensitivities of cheering for a team from Toronto next. Well, this year, the Vancouver Whitecaps are celebrating the 40th anniversary of their 1979 Soccer Bowl win. So as Toronto celebrates the success of the Raptors, we thought we'd take a moment to flash back to the excitement happening here when Vancouver was crowned the North American Soccer League champions.
As the game got underway, people crowded around every available TV set. The displays in the various department stores have never seen so many customers. After the game, fans spilled into the streets singing the praises of the local heroes. Tomorrow, the returning team will parade through the city. Vancouver's first winning team since the Lions won the Grey Cup in 1964. And you can be certain the Whitecaps fans will be there to see them. Blair Griffiths, CBC News, Vancouver.
Yes, it was a wonderful time for, as ABC Television's commentator Jim McKay called it, the village of Vancouver. Some of you may remember that. Well, when's the next time Vancouver will have a celebratory championship parade? Tough to say. The Whitecaps have a new coach this year, and wins have been pretty hard to come by. And the Lions approach the upcoming season with a new coach as well. Meanwhile, the Canucks haven't made the playoffs in 4 years, so in the meantime, fans here may just have to watch the success of other cities with a bit of jealousy. Speaking of which, we'll be back in a few moments with more on the debate in this city on whether or not sports fans should be supporting the Toronto Raptors. Always an interesting debate. Stay with us. Well, as Raptors fever grips the country, Vancouverites can be forgiven for having, well, mixed emotions. We, of course, once had our very own NBA team, the Vancouver Grizzlies. And so as Jesse Johnson reports, while some are keen to jump on the bandwagon, others aren't quite so eager.
Game 1 of the NBA Finals. Kyle Lowry from Edmonton to put it away.
The Toronto Raptors are the first Canadian team ever to make the NBA Finals, and they're already up a game on the heavily favored Golden State Warriors. So lots of basketball fans here in BC are on the bandwagon.
Raptors, baby!
I wish I had a Toronto jersey right now.
You would never catch a Vancouver Canucks fan cheering for the Maple Leafs or a Lions fan cheering for the Argos. But when it comes to basketball, Vancouverites don't have many options. Geographically speaking, the closest team to Vancouver is Portland, but that's a bit of a stretch. Of course, Vancouver had its own team at one point, the Grizzlies, that came into the league the same year as the Raptors in 1995. But 5 years later, the Grizzlies moved to Memphis, leaving the Raptors as the only team in the NBA north of the border.
I intend to do everything in my power to make this franchise a success in Vancouver.
When the Raptors traded for Kawhi Leonard in the offseason and then went on an unbelievable postseason tear, a lot of casual basketball fans around here went 0 to 100 real quick and went all in on Toronto. But still, there are a lot of basketball fans around Vancouver who say it takes more than a pop star and a catchy hashtag to get them to cheer for a team that's from Toronto.
I grew up, I was born in Vancouver, I was raised in Vancouver. It's always been Vancouver, Toronto. I could never bring myself to cheer for the Maple Leafs either. I would always pick the other team. I think it would be hypocritical of me to say I would go cheer for the Raptors. I'm not much of a bandwagon jumper.
So whether you're cheering for the Raptors or cheering against them, there's never been an NBA final that's had so many Canadians cheering. Jesse Johnston, CBC News. Toronto?
Vancouver.
Does Toronto even have a Drake Street?
Well, the Raptors may have ignited a blaze of enthusiasm as they chase the NBA championship. But the battle for the Stanley Cup, you may know, is already underway between the St. Louis Blues and Boston Bruins. So no Canadian team in the final. But as the CBC's Ali Chason reports, one Canadian player is a standout.
We're not on assignment in St. Louis.
I love that.
We're at Jordan Binnington's Toronto family home, the star goalie for the St. Louis Blues.
This is one of my faves. We bring him to lots of family events because he can't always, attend.
Jordan hasn't been home for a while. He's been busy.
Oh, what a save by Binnington!
Busy taking the St. Louis Blues from dead last in the NHL rankings to the Stanley Cup playoffs.
Although he's one of the younger kids in our street, in Oak Ridges, he would go door to door and get a road hockey game going.
I said, we're having tryouts for the Von Ranger 8-year-old team. Why don't you bring him out and we'll see where it goes.
Coach Mike Valascuro remembers the early days and the moment he knew Jordan was going to go far.
We put him on the ice, and I remember taking a shot, and the puck hit him in the head, and the boy did not flinch. Went to the father, and I said, I'd like him on the team. I think he's made to be in net.
And Dad's been collecting helmets ever since.
This was his first mask because he was always a Cujo fan. These ones here, he all
designed by himself. This is the jersey when he got drafted in 2011.
The rookie would only play once in 6 years, until January 7th, 2019.
All of a sudden the phone lit up and they said, hey, Jordan's going in net. Never mind he won, he got a shutout.
In his first start in the NHL.
His career has taken off since winning Rookie of the Month, setting shutout records.
Do I look nervous?
No.
Nerves of steel. Who does he get that from?
Do you get nervous?
Not generally, no.
Okay.
Binnington faced some heat off the ice recently. Some old, racially insensitive tweets of his resurfaced. Binnington brushed the tweets off as sarcasm, neither defending nor denouncing what he said.
Just said, I was young. I'm here to play hockey.
The series is tied between the Blues and the Bruins in the fight for the cup.
I don't want to get emotional.
However it turns out for her son and his team, she hopes hockey families hear this.
I know it's hard, hockey parents, and some days you feel like, it's just too much, but you do it because they love it so much.
Fans, too.
And a save by Binnington.
Yeah, just treasure every minute.
Ali Chiasson, CBC News, Toronto.
Well, baseball fans in Victoria are being treated to a rather unique game this weekend. As Megan Thomas reports, an exhibition game will feature an American team and a Cuban team facing off on neutral Canadian soil.
Players from the Union de Reyes team look plenty comfortable at the plate as they hold a practice at Victoria's Royal Athletic Park. The team comes to Vancouver Island each spring as part of a grassroots baseball exchange. The aim is to share in the international love of the sport, and the highlight is usually a game against the Victoria Harbour Cats of the West Coast League. But this year, the Harbour Cats decided to throw in some diplomacy on the diamond. They invited a team from south of the border to play the Cubans.
When we brought it up to the Port Angeles lefties, they jumped all over it. They realized the unique opportunity involved with it. They also realized that there's an opportunity to do something that's a bigger mindset and a bigger thought around this.
The Harbour Cats know the frosty political relations between the U.S. and Cuba well. In previous years, the team has had Cuban players on its own roster, but they had to sit out away games played in the U.S.
They're not allowed to cross the border. I mean, there's the embargoes that's happened back to Bay of Pigs days, and they had to fly from Havana to Toronto. They have to fly over the U.S. They can't touch down in the U.S. They come here and they get to do something very, very unique, and they realize it too. The Cubans, Port Angeles, everybody realizes how rare this opportunity is.
The Cuban players say any political tensions will be left on the sidelines when the teams hit the field.
Nosotros jugar el béisbol, no política. What is important for us to play baseball?
The first pitch in this unique international celebration of the spirit of baseball will be thrown on Sunday afternoon. Megan Thomas, CBC News, Victoria.
And in Victoria, totem poles were lowered to the ground today in a moving ceremony. Why are they being taken down and where are they going? Coming up. Here are some of the stories we're following tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
We see it as a victory because it's been a long fight. First through Brian Fitzpatrick, who has now passed away. It was his son that died.
Sam Fitzpatrick was killed by a falling boulder on a BC Worksite 10 years ago. Now, the company he was working for and 2 former managers are facing unprecedented criminal charges.
We put so much hours in, and then he just treats us like this. It's a smack to the face.
Bounced paychecks, unpaid wages. Former employees of a now defunct Port Moody pub say they're owed thousands of dollars.
I'm grateful they're pointing out the Canadian genocide because that's what this is.
A national inquiry into the murders and disappearances of Indigenous women calls it a Canadian genocide. The inquiry urging the federal, provincial, and territorial governments to develop an action plan to counter violence against Indigenous women and girls. Well, for decades, advocates have been pushing for an Indigenous healing center on Vancouver's downtown east side. Now they have renewed hope the project could come to life after a motion at the Park Board this week. The CBC's Mickey Cowan met with the advocates and has more on what the healing center might look like and mean to the community.
Absolutely.
Tracy Draper knows what it's like to reconnect with Indigenous traditions.
I made my first drum three months ago, and it was the most wonderful experience I've ever had in my whole life.
Draper was part of the 60s scoop and adopted into a European family as a child. Growing up, she knew little about her heritage from Saskatchewan's Pipikasis Cree Nation. Her search for identity brought her to the downtown east side.
That is where I found many of my people and other nations of people congregating and looking for healing and wellness like I was.
Draper says access to cultural tradition was crucial in her recovery from drug and alcohol addiction. That's why she's supporting the call for a healing center.
A healing center and bringing culture back is our people's way to getting our hearts and our spirits back.
It would be an Indigenous peer healing center.
Chris Livingstone has been advocating for a center like this since 2002. He's part of a group garnering support to build a longhouse at Crab Park on what is now a parking lot. The aim, manage alcohol addictions and offer harm reduction and support. They want to take ownership of their own healing, feeling that too much of the support already offered is top-down.
We often feel that the voices of the downtown east side are ignored.
This week, good news for the project. The Park Board passing a motion aiming to make the healing center a reality.
We're hopeful that we can get City Council and senior levels of government to fund it and to start to move ahead.
City officials, the federal government, even the Vancouver Port Authority would need to be on board. Crab Park itself on land leased from the port, and the only oceanside park in the downtown east side.
It's important, it's essential for us to come together in a place where we have been displaced and give us our chance to get that back.
The project still has a long way to go, but those behind it are hopeful. With a little luck, support, and perseverance, their dream to have a healing center in the downtown east side will come true. Mickey Cowan, CBC News, Vancouver.
A moving ceremony in Victoria today on the grounds of the Royal BC Museum. Totems were slowly lowered to the ground there. They've stood in the provincial capital for decades, but now they're on a final journey home. Here are some of the highlights of the day.
This one represents creatures from the bottom of the ocean, and we know this because if you look at the way the eyes are carved, they are protruding. If, for example, if you were fishing for halibut and you reeled in that fish, as the water pressure changes, the eyes bulge. That's why these ones are not carved as the usual masks that you see or poles that you see where the eyes are flat. Hukuk at the top, that mythical bird, and then the hukuk is standing on Kumbakwa, the sea chief. The sea chief is standing on a bear, and the bear is holding a whale in one paw and a copper in another.
When the original went down, it was through Mungo's work that carved a replica of that pole. So this is not the original pole, it's a replica, and it now too has reached the end of its time. With seeing the Quatsino pole taken down, I understand the inside core of the pole is rotten, and so it's no longer safe to stand where it is. But in traditional times, our people would just let that expression of our tradition return to the earth in its natural life cycle.
The original was put on site here. It used to be standing outside what was supposed to represent a Haida house. When the museum realized that the pollution in the city can actually speed up the deterioration process, that's when they hired my great-grandfather, Chief Mungo Martin, to replicate the poles. So in working with my grandfather, Chief Henry Hunt, and Mungo's own son, David Martin, they replicated this one, and it was raised in 1954. The life expectancy of a pole is about 50 years, and then they start to deteriorate from the inside out. When that would happen, most often, unless it was a memorial pole, they would lay the pole down on its side, and it would be left to be reclaimed by the earth, and it served its purpose.
And at 6:41 on this Friday evening, a look across to the North Shore Mountains tonight. A spectacular summer-like end to May here in Vancouver today. Is there more sun to come this weekend? Christy has the full forecast next. The fire threatening a remote First Nations community in northern Ontario is getting worse tonight. It's grown from 400 hectares to more than 3,000, and that's forcing residents of Pikangikum First Nation to flee. About 2,300 people live there, some 500 kilometers northwest of Thunder Bay. Royal Canadian Air Force is using Hercules transport planes to help with a mass evacuation. Hundreds of high-priority residents are being moved first. Many are going to Thunder Bay. They include seniors, children, and people with breathing difficulties. Environment Canada has issued a special air quality statement for the area near the fire. Well, the weekend is here, and so is Christy with tonight's forecast. Christy?
Thanks, Mike. It has been a beautiful day for getting outside in terms of our temperatures. Temperatures in the 20s or very near to the 20s in areas like Vancouver, towards Nanaimo. Warm day, 25 degrees this afternoon. And it looks like these temperatures will be here to stay as you move through the weekend. Temperatures averaging a good 3 or 4 degrees above what's normal for this time of year for your daily highs. And lots of sunshine as well. Now, that makes it great weather for getting outside. but it does mean that we are still trending below seasonal when it comes to our precipitation. Here's a look at some of our May precipitation totals compared to our climate normals. So you can see most areas well below seasonal. Areas like Vancouver, you saw only about 30 millimeters in the month of May, when you should see closer to 65. Very dry conditions up the coast as well and into the interior. A little closer to normal in Williams Lake and Prince George, but it still has been trending on the drier side after a very dry spring in most areas. Now, in terms of our upper atmosphere, seeing quite a bit of flow to the north, which is keeping all of our systems away from parts of southern BC. A little bit of thunderstorm activity this afternoon, just with some daytime convection, but otherwise it's been pretty quiet, and it looks like that's going to continue towards the coast for the next 24 to 36 hours. Tomorrow morning early, you might see a little bit of stray cloud cover, but otherwise nothing really to speak of in Vancouver. A little bit of showery weather could pop up on the island, but otherwise it's going to be pretty quiet. Still seeing that high pressure really dominating this forecast. As for our forecast for tomorrow, across most of the province, seeing lots of sunshine, a little bit of haze towards the Prince George area from those fires burning in Alberta. Not a lot of that mixing down to the surface, but you could see that in the higher levels of the atmosphere. 32 degrees in the Kamloops region, and seeing the risk of thunderstorms again into parts of the interior into the afternoon hours. A little bit of windy weather on the coast and some showery weather returning to the Prince Rupert area, Port Hardy. But otherwise, if you head south, that's where things clear out and really heat up. 25 degrees in the Abbotsford area for tomorrow. A little bit of morning fog possible in Nanaimo and Comox, but otherwise it's going to be another pretty quiet day. A great day for getting outside, but you will need sunscreen. Into Vancouver, over the forecast period, looking pretty consistent for the next 3 days, but then things starting to break down, seeing a little bit of a change for next week. 22 degrees for your day tomorrow. Temperatures falling closer to seasonal by midweek next week, and the risk of some passing showers on Tuesday and Wednesday. A little more steady precipitation looking to move into the region for Friday, and temperatures by the end of the week much closer to seasonal. Mike?
Christy, thanks very much. Well, days after coming to terms with Canada on tariffs, Donald Trump is lashing out at another neighbor, this time Mexico. Why he's vowing to punish his southern trading partner with tariffs, right after the break.
Hi, I'm Amy Bell, and here's what's in your CBC Vancouver inbox. If you've ever wondered what it's like behind the scenes here at CBC Vancouver, here's your chance. Go online and book a date to come in for a tour of our integrated newsroom. And our home can be your home. From concerts to galas to bar mitzvahs, our studio space can be transformed for any occasion and is available for rent. For more from CBC Vancouver, check us out online at cbc.ca/BC.
Another mass shooting in the United States, this time in Virginia. Officials say the shooting happened at about 4 o'clock local time inside a city building in Virginia Beach. The gunman, said to be a disgruntled city employee, is also dead after being shot by police. A police officer was among those injured after being shot in the exchange with the gunman, but was saved by his bulletproof vest and is expected to be okay. Several of those injured were airlifted to hospital with unknown injuries. We'll have more on this story tonight on The National. U.S. President Donald Trump is ignoring domestic and international objections and doubling down on his threat to impose tariffs on all imports from Mexico. As Stephen D'Souza reports, the rhetoric is rattling markets and threatening ratification of the new Canada-Mexico-U.S. trade deal.
Donald Trump has made a dramatic threat, one that he hopes will solve the crisis at the U.S.-Mexico border, but one that could also upend a new North American free trade deal.
If we don't have security at our border and we don't know who's coming in and we can't process them and we're being totally overrun, as we're seeing the numbers get worse and worse, the president has a constitutional obligation to step up and do something.
Trump says starting June 10th, the U.S. will impose a 5% tariff on all Mexican imports. Then, if Mexico doesn't act quickly enough to stem the flow of migrants across the border, the tariffs will go up, increasing every month up to 25% by October. It's an ominous threat that has struck fear in the market and business community and America's trading partners. Though they haven't provided solid targets or provided specific numbers, White House officials say there are things Mexico can do right away.
One of the biggest things they can do is the repatriation of the thousands of people coming from Central America. They can return them back home. They can stop these massive caravans from coming through their country into ours.
Mexico's president says they won't respond to threats with desperation, but will push for dialogue. The Foreign Affairs Secretary was in Washington to try to smooth things over. Mexico says it has conducted raids on caravans and denied permits to groups coming up from Central America, everything short of breaking human rights laws. The tariffs could throw a wrench into the revised NAFTA deal, affecting everything from produce to auto parts. The U.S. imports about $350 billion worth of goods from Mexico, so the initial tariff would amount to a $17 billion levy. Now, Trump has made threats like this before. In late March, he threatened to close the entire border before eventually walking that threat back. Stephen D'Souza, CBC News, New York.
Oh, he's a legend of music, so does a biographical movie on his storied career live up to Elton John's bigger-than-life personality? Our Eli Glasner reviews Rocket Man next. Well, Vancouver Craft Beer Week is in full swing tonight, and it's celebrating its 10-year anniversary. 100 different breweries and cideries will take part in the 10-day celebration across Vancouver. Ian Hill started his brewery back in 1993. He says over the last decade, he's seen the city's love of local breweries broaden.
People want to go to bars that are in breweries. There's something very real and very honest about it. And it's such a great way for us all to also to engage with our customers and, figuratively speaking, tell our story about who we are and what we believe in, and people get excited about us.
Organizers are expecting 5,000 people to attend the festival at the PNE Fairgrounds this year. Events kick off today, and the festival runs on June 8th and June 9th. Well, the movie Bohemian Rhapsody put the classic rock band Queen and frontman Freddie Mercury back in the spotlight. Now there's another rock and roll biopic, or a biopic as some people say, coming to theaters. Rocket Man is the story of Elton John and comes with the pop singer's blessing. Here's our Eli Glasner with his review tonight.
People don't pay to see Rich White. They pay to see Elton John.
Rocket Man may be directed by Dexter Fletcher, the guy who rescued Bohemian Rhapsody, but it's a much better film because, like Elton John, Rocket Man takes risks. It's an audacious rock opera using the Elton John songbook to put us in the pop star's headspace. It starts with Elton in rehab. Then we flash back to the early days where Elton was a chubby kid named Reggie, his home life horrid, so he escapes into music. And oh, what music. Saturday Night's All Right for Fighting becomes an anthem of awakening as Elton finds his voice. Tiny Dancer is a heartbreaker as Elton watches his writing partner Bernie walk away in Los Angeles. But let's back up and see how we got to America. The Scene, the legendary Troubadour nightclub, a major opportunity for Elton. Then, when Elton's pounding those piano keys, there's a moment when everybody's floating, literally suspended in the air by the emotional high of the performance. But it wouldn't work without Taron Egerton as Elton. And that is his voice singing. Yeah, it's not a perfect copy, but Taron makes it his own. And I think what he shares with Elton is that gusto, his drive to prove himself. And then you look behind the bravado and you see something else. This is a story about the biggest rock star of his time hiding his sadness behind sequins and sunglasses. A man told by his mother he'll never be truly loved. It's a wild ride, all right, and who sends him over the edge is Richard Madden as his lover and music manager, John Reid. The two share a steamy bedroom scene early on, but eventually their relationship grows toxic.
I should have sacked you when you left me.
I am glad I left you. It means I can maintain some objectivity in your self-indulgent, myopic little world. Get in the studio, make some music, or don't. I don't care.
Madden is said to be under consideration as the next James Bond, and it's easy to see why. He's like a fist wrapped in silk, beautiful, but that thread of violence underneath. Also worth watching is Jamie Bell as Elton's steadfast writing partner Bernie. I'm still wondering why American Bryce Dallas Howard was cast as Elton's very English mother, but don't let that quibble stop you from enjoying this rocket ride. 4 stars out of 5. Eli Glasner, CBC News, Toronto.
Some people here said it would be 4 stars. Just saying, have to check it out. Well, you can always find our news program online at cbc.ca/BC. Our next local news is right here with Dan Burrett at 11 after the National. Thanks for watching. Have a great weekend. No, I did not.